Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of April the 6th and the 7th, 2024. Now, this weekend there is a conjunction between the Moon and Saturn, and it's not a particularly unusual aspect, though I did want to consider this conjunction in a bit of detail in terms of what it might mean, and also I wanted to look at the horoscopes of people who have the Moon conjunct Saturn, and I want to be balanced in my interpretation of this conjunction. I sometimes get criticized when looking at something which is traditionally negative, like Moon in Capricorn, Venus in Scorpio, for being overly negative about the configuration. I think in the case of Moon in Capricorn, for example, I was looking at the charts that I found interesting, and in all of those cases, pretty much, Moon conjunct Saturn, Moon in Capricorn did seem to be quite difficult and seemed to coincide with people that were often not particularly nice. In the case of Moon conjunct Saturn, I think I can be more balanced. I think there is certainly a positive dimension to having Moon conjunct Saturn, even though it does have a rather difficult reputation. But before I consider Moon conjunct Saturn, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for this weekend. And you'll see top right a few people that do have Moon conjunct Saturn. There's the Scottish First Minister. I talked about him yesterday, but I'm going to talk about him again. Humza Yousaf, who certainly has Moon conjunct Saturn. There's the actress Diana Rigg, who had Moon conjunct Saturn. Piers Morgan has Moon conjunct Saturn, and right in the middle, that is William Burroughs, the writer, one of America's best writers. He certainly had Moon conjunct Saturn, and I think, as I will show you, Moon conjunct Saturn really does seem to fit him well. There is a background here that I wasn't able to really show. That's just an atomic cloud. It's a reminder that there was an exact Moon conjunct Saturn at the time of Hiroshima. But I will be, as I said, I will be going into that in detail a bit later. As far as the astrology is concerned, this is the horoscope for the weekend. I've set this chart for midnight on Sunday, right in the middle of a weekend, and I've set it for New York. There's nothing special about it being set for New York. It's simply a matter of convenience. So as far as what's happening this weekend, well, you can see that Venus is now well established in Aries, so we can really feel the influence of Venus being in this sign. Perhaps some of us are being a little more assertive than usual, and we feel that we do need to express ourselves, get our message across, get our personality across in terms of relationships. We also, I hope, are being very careful about our aesthetic judgment. Venus is a planet of beauty. It's in Aries, a sign of its detriment. So that means our aesthetic taste may not be great over the next few weeks. Though I should make it clear that there is a difference between seeing Venus in Aries, like in the sky, and having Venus in Aries in your horoscope. If you've got Venus in Aries in your horoscope, you have to deal with that all the time, and you work out ways of dealing with it. So I'm not saying just because you've got Venus in Aries that you've got no taste. I'm not saying that. But when we've got Venus in Aries in the sky right now, there is in general perhaps a deficit in aesthetic taste. So we have to just be careful about making judgments about what looks good. And we certainly shouldn't be spending money unnecessarily on things just because they look good, because in the light of day, or in the light of Venus being in another sign like Taurus, they might not look quite so good. The moon is in Pisces halfway through the weekend. So Saturday is a complete moon in Pisces day. No doubt about that. But as we move into Sunday, as we move into Pisces, the moon starts to move into Aries. So to be precise, London time on Sunday at 12:25 in the afternoon, around lunchtime, the moon goes into Aries. From a perspective of New York, that is 7:25, and of course, sorry, is that right? Yeah, 7:25 from a perspective of New York. So that's pretty early in the morning, even earlier in the morning if you're on the West Coast, so in California, Oregon, British Columbia. You'll experience moon going into Aries at 4:25. So really, if you're in the Americas, Sunday is a moon in Aries day, and so it may be rather different. It may be more active, more impulsive, and we're starting to get actually quite a big build-up in Aries, because we've already got the Sun and Venus, as well as Chiron and Mercury in Aries, and the North Node, and the Moon is about to join it. So we're going to have quite a build-up in that sign. So Aries influence is going to become quite important. Now, going back to Saturday, on Saturday, we may feel that things are at times a bit difficult because we have a conjunction between Moon and Mars, and a conjunction between the Moon and Saturn. So Moon being close to Mars and Saturn may make Saturday a somewhat difficult day for some of us. Yes, we may be quite flexible. Moon in Pisces, it's a nice place for a moon to be, a bit emotional, but there could be restrictions as we come across Moon conjunct Saturn, Moon conjunct Mars. But we shouldn't take these restrictions too seriously, and if we see other people being very tense on Saturday, we shouldn't take the view that, oh well, that's the whole picture, we have to just accept that's the way it is, bad weekend. Not really, because the moon does move quite quickly, and having made conjunctions to Mars and Saturn, the moon makes a sextile to Jupiter, so that is a very different energy. So on Saturday, there's a moon in Pisces, and there's Jupiter, 18-19 Taurus. So moon sextile Jupiter does make up for it. And so even if we feel a bit frustrated on Saturday, we can't get things done, we shouldn't get too upset about it, because things will change, and moon sextile Jupiter does allow things to happen in a positive sense. And so it's important to be optimistic, even if things aren't going our way on Saturday, because I think in the end the skies will start to clear, the clouds will go, and yes, there'll be something to smile about. Another thing going on is that Venus is making a sextile to Pluto. This was sort of happening on Friday, but now we really feel it. So that is a feature, I would have said, of the whole weekend, Venus sextile Pluto. Venus in Aries, sextile Pluto in Aquarius. I think many of us can be quite persuasive and we can use our charms to get our way. So if there's something you want over the weekend, it's tempting to take the Aries approach, just to sort of ask for it, demand it, be a battering ram. That's how Aries gets its way. But it may not be necessary to be a battering ram with Venus sextile Pluto. Yeah, we can use our charms. We can be nice to people. We can be a little bit manipulative, and in that way we can get our way, and in the process not cause any trouble. So a bit of subtlety might be useful in terms of how we assert ourselves. Finishing with the midpoints, of course I'll be looking at the heliocentric picture in a moment, just the midpoints, the main things going on. The Sun is conjunct the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. You can see this. There's Saturn at 14 Pisces. There's Uranus at 21 Taurus. And there's Sun in the middle. So Sun is on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. Saturn-Uranus is quite tense as a principle. You know, Saturn is the planet of restriction, trying to build walls and boundaries. Uranus is the rebel. You know, we want to break free with Saturn-Uranus, and it's hard work. It's not enough to just do things gradually and quietly and to hope that in the end we get our way. Sun on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint is feeling so tense that like something has to happen. And we do have to be a bit careful there. Sometimes it might feel that just normal behavior isn't enough. We have to turn things upside down. Or we might decide that we just can't express ourselves and we just start stewing. And it's always a bad idea to stew, because in the end we might just explode. So I think with Sun conjunct Saturn on Uranus midpoint, we have to find a way of expressing ourselves in a way that's relatively harmonious. Okay, it may be that we need to bring something to a head. Maybe we feel the necessity to have an argument. But I think in most cases there are always alternative approaches. I mean, for example, Mercury is on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. So Mercury is the communication planet. There's Mercury, and there's Venus, there's Jupiter. Mercury is right in the middle of Venus and Jupiter, even if that chart doesn't immediately show it. And so this might be another way of expressing ourselves, of making things happen. Venus and Jupiter, incredibly optimistic pair. Jupiter is the greater benefic, Venus is the lesser benefic. Mercury on the midpoint means that we can be optimistic in the things we say, and through our optimism we can get attention, and we can make good things happen just by saying the right words. And Mercury is also the planet of thinking. So I think that many of us are going to be more optimistic than usual. You know, quite recently we had Mercury aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and some of us were feeling somewhat negative, had perhaps some very weird thoughts. Well, that is starting to transition now. Mercury on Venus-Jupiter midpoint, that's optimistic and wholesome, and our optimism can really make things happen. Then there is the heliocentric position. It's always important, I believe, to see what's happening from a perspective of the Sun. Planets go round the Sun. The Earth goes round the Sun. And from a heliocentric perspective, here we go. That's a heliocentric picture for the weekend. You can see that the Earth is trine Mars. It's still trine Mars. It's been trine Mars for a few days now. the trine is starting to separate, but it's still there. And so with Earth trine Mars, there are still people that want to get their way. It's a reminder that we do live in a violent world. Another thing going on, and I think that the most important thing happening this weekend, is a conjunction between Venus and Saturn in Pisces. So Venus is at 11:05 Pisces at midnight New York, the middle of a weekend on the 7th, and Saturn is at 11 degrees 1 Pisces. So exact Venus-Saturn heliocentric conjunction. This is going to have some impact on relationships. I think it could put a damper on it. Not just in terms of one's personal life, but the world in general. There is going to be a certain coldness this weekend. And it's a global thing. Must emphasize that. Do not take it personally. It's a cold atmosphere. People are going to find it difficult to express their feelings. And maybe this is also reflected in the fact that from a geocentric point of view, Venus is moving into Aries. It's already in Aries. It's in around 2 degrees Aries, but it's establishing itself in Aries. We've just had Venus in Pisces for a few weeks, and that Venus in Pisces was warm and flexible and relatively friendly, and Venus now in Aries, it's not so warm and fuzzy, Venus in Aries. And we've also got this heliocentric conjunction between Venus and Saturn. So on an emotional level, don't expect so much, and we're part of it. We may not be able to express our warmth and joy, at least in an emotional way, as much as we perhaps usually can. So if you find that this weekend things are a bit cold, don't take it to heart. Just remind yourself that this is just a reflection of what's going on astrologically, the fact that Venus is making a conjunction to Saturn, and remember, it's a heliocentric conjunction. I now want to look at the astrology in terms of the 12 signs. So let me just put this chart back to its make it heliocentric again. There we go. And I'm now going to give you my forecast for the 12 signs for the weekend of April the 6th and April the 7th, 2024. Aries. In some respects, Aries, it's a weekend of two halves. On Saturday, you may not quite feel that you're yourself. You might just feel somewhat negative, and you may be aware of some major frustrations, something you want to get done, but you just can't bring it out into the open, and it's you just can't express yourself, and you might feel a bit down about that, and you're certainly not going to be in the mood for telling people what's on your mind. It would just, the words just won't come out, and I think there could be a sense of frustration and even a little bit of anger. So one aspect that is happening on Saturday, which I forgot to mention in my overview, is the fact that Mercury is making a semi-square to Mars. And Mercury is the planet of thought, it's a planet of communication, it's making a difficult aspect to Mars. There are things you're annoyed about, there are things you're thinking about. You'd like to tell people what's on your mind, but you can't. And that might be bothering you. But do bear with it. I've mentioned that the moon is making conjunctions to Mars and Saturn, but the moon is also making a sextile to Jupiter. Now that moon sextile Jupiter Aries is not going to make you wonderfully extroverted, but at a certain point on Saturday, I think that you're going to get a sense of purpose and a sense that you're doing the right thing, that if you just carry on grinding away in the same direction, you'll eventually be successful and you'll reach some of your goals in many areas, but that includes money, because from an Aries perspective, Jupiter is in Taurus. Jupiter is a fortunate influence. It's in Taurus, a sign that from an Aries perspective is financially orientated. And so with the moon making a sextile to Jupiter on Saturday, if you look hard enough, there may be a sense of financial relief. You may see that what seemed to be a financial problem may actually be at best an opportunity, or at least you'll realize that something isn't quite as bad as you thought it was. Now, looking at Sunday, the moon does change sign. Now, this rather depends where you are. If you're in the Americas, the moon changes sign early in the morning on Sunday. If you're in Western Europe, it's lunchtime. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, perhaps this doesn't really apply for you because the moon changes sign very late on Sunday. But with the moon moving into Aries, I think you're going to cheer up. Things will change. All of a sudden, you will be much more of an extrovert and more typically Aries. You can be yourself. You can really start to assert yourself, and I think you'll be helped by the fact that when the moon moves into Aries, it will straight away make a conjunction to Venus. And I think that your social skills will improve, and you'll find it much easier to relate to the world around you. And yes, if you want to be assertive and want to push your presence out there onto the world, I think you'll be successful. I think people will take note of what you're doing. Okay, you might be a little bit clumsy in terms of asserting yourself on Sunday, but I don't think anyone's going to mind. The point is, you will get there and you will make the impression that you want to make. In the end, it might take a couple of attempts, but in the end, it will be very clear what you want. I suppose I should say something about relationships, and one can't avoid the fact that this weekend Venus is making a sextile to Pluto. Venus is moving through your sign. So with Venus sextile Pluto, that might indicate someone who is quite persuasive. Venus being ruler of Libra, which is your opposite sign. So if Venus is ruler of Libra, your opposite sign, we could take Venus as being someone else, someone who is very interested in you, but someone who is also quite persuasive, more persuasive in a way than they actually deserve to be. Let me sort of say that again, re-express that. It's like someone who is fundamentally in a weak position, but who temporally is able to be more persuasive than usual. So I don't know if anyone fits the bill. So don't be fooled by persuasive people in the sense of thinking they're stronger than they are. But just because you've got a weak person trying to be persuasive doesn't mean they're up to no good. Maybe you need to take them seriously. Maybe you need to listen to what they're saying. And in the end, maybe you need to help them out or try to understand what their problem is or what they want from you. Once you understand what they want, what makes them tick, then you will be in a better position to make decisions. Though that persuasiveness is not just about another person, it could actually be about you yourself. I think that as you move into Sunday, that Venus sextile Pluto is going to be helpful in terms of you making an impact. Taurus. Venus is making a sextile to Pluto. I was just talking about that to Aries. Venus is your ruler. This means with Venus making a sextile to Pluto, you are going to be quite persuasive. I think that you will be able to get your way relatively easily this weekend, though especially on Sunday. You're able to be manipulative, not in a direct way. I know that Taurians can be quite unsubtle sometimes, but you have to work from behind the scenes, slowly creating a situation where you're able to get your way. And force is certainly not required with Venus sextile Pluto. It's just using your charms and being yourself, and that should be enough. And yeah, this Venus sextile Pluto is a theme throughout the weekend. And just a reminder that Venus has now gone into Aries, and from a Taurian perspective, Aries is a fairly low profile sign. And this goes back to what I was saying about how you can be persuasive. You don't want to be too over the top. You don't want to be too much of an extrovert. That will just put people off. You just need to be patient. And as I said, work behind the scenes. In terms of the difference between Saturday and Sunday, I think on Saturday you're probably going to be more in the mood for interacting with other people, your social life, for example. But there is a danger of disappointment there. Yeah, you can meet people, you can be with people, you can talk to people, but they may not deliver. And I think you're not helped by the fact that the moon is making a conjunction to Mars and Saturn. That does put a damper on things. And so don't have definite expectations on Saturday about what other people can give you. But at the same time, don't be entirely negative, because on Saturday, the moon, having made rather difficult conjunctions to Mars and Saturn, makes a sextile aspect to Jupiter. And that's a completely different energy. And moon sextile Jupiter can be about being quite successful in a social sense. So what your social life may be about is, to begin with, not really getting very far, thinking that people are just useless and unexpressive. But if you keep working away, that moon conjunct Mars and Saturn, its influence will start to fade, and you'll start to see something very different in the form of that moon sextile Jupiter. And at that point, you can really get attention, and your fundamental optimism will start coming out into the open. Then, moving into Sunday, I've already said that your going to be quite persuasive on Sunday. But the moon will be moving into Aries. Okay, when it moves into Aries kind of depends on your time zone. If you're in the Americas, effectively it's in Aries all day long. If you're in Europe, last half of the day. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, well, not really. Moon doesn't go into Aries until very late on Sunday. So effectively, you've got Moon in Pisces all day. But if you're in the Americas and Western Europe on Sunday, low-profile approach works best. That's how you are most influential. If you have to make a big show and you have to, you're out there in the world trying your hardest to get results, shouting, making a lot of noise, being super aggressive, you won't achieve anything. So get your approach right on Sunday. It is very important. Gemini. It's a somewhat mixed weekend because we have the moon in Pisces on the Saturday, moon in Aries on Sunday by and large. So on Saturday, I think you're going to really feel that there are things to do with the moon in Pisces, and that moon in Pisces is conjunct Mars and Saturn, and it is sextile Jupiter. And the conjunction between the moon and Mars and Saturn, I don't want to be entirely negative about it. I know we think, oh, Mars Saturn is difficult, moon is conjunct Mars Saturn, that's unfortunate, but not necessarily. It kind of depends what you're doing. Okay, if you are spending Saturday trying to, I don't know, enjoy yourself, trying to relax, then it might be hard work. I think in the end you will succeed, and because the moon will eventually make a sextile aspect to Jupiter, but we just shouldn't forget that the moon is also making this conjunction to Mars and Saturn, and I think this is probably especially true if you are in, say, East Asia, again, Australia, New Zealand. I hate generalizing it. I mean, if you are in Australia and New Zealand, I do apologize for sort of generalizing this, as I know it's a huge area, and just saying, oh, Australia, New Zealand, is putting it all together. I know they're completely separate countries, and Australia has separate parts, but I do apologize for that generalization, but I find it does make things easier for me. But I do think that the moon conjunct Mars and Saturn on Saturday is going to be more of a factor if you are in Australia, New Zealand, and Eastern Asia. But I think it's important for all of us, not just that part of the world. With moon conjunct Mars and Saturn on Saturday, there is going to be a grim determination there to get things done. So if you're doing something serious on Saturday, then I think you'll be very successful. If you're doing something frivolous on Saturday, a different story. It may be hard work. I mean, that's not the way it's supposed to be, is it? You do something frivolous and it ends up being hard work. Well, if Moon is conjunct Saturn, that's not frivolous. And if you try to be frivolous with Moon conjunct Saturn, you'll get kicked in the face, won't you? Okay, but if you're persistent, in the end, the Moon will move away from the conjunction of Mars and Saturn, start making the sextile to Jupiter. So Saturday, try and do something really useful and serious. Something that is important. Maybe connected with business, organization. You might be working on Saturday. So that, Gemini, is probably the best way of dealing with Saturday. Then, the moon moves into Aries, and so on Sunday you can probably afford to relax more. After all, the moon is not just moving into Aries, it's making a conjunction to Venus in Aries, and in general, I think that you're going to be a nicer person, and it's going to be easier to get on with people. And while all this is going on, Mercury, which is your ruler, Mercury rules Gemini, Mercury is on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. In fact, it's conjunct the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. And really, this is very good. All weekend long. I mean, I know I've talked about some of the potential trials and tribulations on Saturday. It doesn't take away from the fact that Mercury is conjunct Venus of the Jupiter midpoint. That is about fundamental optimism. Regardless of what's going on this weekend, even if you're dealing with tough struggles on Saturday morning, for example, you've still got Mercury on a Venus-Jupiter midpoint. It means your fundamental optimism is going to see you through. And if you're talking to people, you will sound optimistic in many cases. And if you find that there are people you meet who are quite negative about the world, I think that your words can make all the difference. I think that you are going to know how to cheer people up. And almost with Mercury conjunct the Venus-Jupiter midpoint, it's almost the case that through positive thinking, you can really make things happen. Though I should say, I'm not a fan of positive thinking. In my view, positive thinking often leads to the reverse. But that's just my misanthropic prejudice. But if it is possible to have positive thinking, to benefit from positive thinking, then Gemini, it's in your hands, because Mercury is conjunct the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. Cancer. The moon is, of course, very important when trying to understand what is happening in the Cancerian world. And by and large, Saturday is a bit of a moon in Pisces day, and Sunday is more of a moon in Aries day. Of course, it does depend on your time zone, and I'm sorry to make generalizations, but on Saturday you are going to be more influenced by that moon in Pisces, and I think that you might have some serious thoughts about what you're doing, where you're going. And yeah, they might be serious thoughts. It's supposed to be something positive and optimistic when we think about our direction in life. But there is some seriousness there. Even if you're thinking about religion and spirituality, it's something that really does need to be considered. You're wondering, is this the right approach? Okay, I might not be necessarily talking about religion and spirituality. It might relate also to your philosophy on life, but there is some seriousness there. And some Cancerians might be wondering on Saturday whether you're in the right place geographically. You might be thinking, hold on, maybe you need to move somewhere else. Okay, maybe not permanently, but right where you are may not be giving you everything you want. And you're thinking, well, if you go to somewhere the other side of the world, it might be better. You know, it's quite incredible that so many people now, when I talk to people, they're always asking this question, where should I live? And it's not just Cancerians. Everyone is asking themselves this question because they think that the world is falling apart, and they think that their particular part of the world is falling apart, and they want to move somewhere else. It's so common. And so, given this general tendency that I'm noticing, I suspect that you may be really picking up on this in a big way. You may feel that you'd like to go somewhere completely different, that you'd like to live somewhere completely different, but you're thinking, well, how are you going to get there? What about all the problems? How are you ever going to make changes? Are you stuck in the place where you are? And that's a big thing, even for a Cancerian. I mean, a Cancerians are supposed to be quite a home-orientated sign, but I think you're starting to see the disadvantages of being in one place. What do I say? Well, perhaps the grass is always greener. One always looks at another place and it looks better, but maybe you should look at where you are right now and consider its benefits. So that is some of the things going on Saturday. So I'm sort of suggesting that it could be quite a psychological day, where it's more about what you're thinking and feeling rather than what actually goes on in the real outside world. Yet on Saturday the moon is making a sextile to Jupiter, and that kind of makes up for a lot. It's perhaps about having a period where you are feeling negative, where you are having serious thoughts, and it may not be much fun. And then the moon makes a sextile to Jupiter. Very fortunate sextile, and that makes things a whole lot better. Suddenly you stop worrying, and maybe you're distracted. Perhaps someone you know gets in touch, or something happens which stops you being so introspective, and you start thinking about other people, and for no particular reason on Saturday you suddenly start to feel quite a lot happier. Then, looking at Sunday, the moon changes sign. It moves out of Pisces and it moves into Aries, and it makes a conjunction to Venus in Aries. Now, that does depend on your time zone. It doesn't apply so much if you're in East Asia, Australia or New Zealand, but certainly Americas and Western Europe, moon is moving into Aries, moon is making this conjunction to Venus, and you're going to feel quite good about yourself. It's a continuation of what I was saying, I think, yesterday, Cancer. I was telling you yesterday that Venus is moving into Aries, and I suggested, I think, to you that you might be quite vain in your own way. You might be thinking about what you look like. And I think with moon moving into Aries, it's more of the same. But I don't mean that really in a negative sense. You will have a sense of yes, what you look like, how you occur to other people, but I think that you're going to have a sense that it's important to have an impact, and that's why you're concerned about the way you look, why mirrors are important. What did I say? Mirror, mirror on the wall. Who is the most beautiful of them all? Yeah, I said that yesterday, and I suppose on Friday, and I suppose I repeat that because there's a moon conjunct Venus in Aries. But you want to look your best for a reason, and I think it's because your ambitions are strong on Sunday. And I know it's a Sunday, and I know that Sunday very often not much happens. People aren't working, people aren't engaged in business usually. But if you can be, depends on your situation, that would be good. And overall, on Sunday, I think you'll be very good at being able to reach out to the wider public. Depends on your circumstances, but you will be noticed. And it's your destiny to be noticed. By destiny, I mean, I'm not saying that it will happen. I'm saying it is the right thing for you to be noticed, not just this weekend, but Venus is moving to a conjunction of a North Node in a high-profile sector of your chart, and Sunday may be a day of rest. Okay, if it has to be a day of rest, then it has to be a day of rest, but the Moon will be in Aries on Monday as well. So Cancer, it's important that you live up to your responsibilities. It is important that you're noticed. Okay, if it can't be Sunday, then it should be Monday, because you've got something to offer. And I think Cancer, you can display a certain amount of leadership. And right now there are people out there who need leadership, and they need the leadership of someone like you. Leo, the Sun is your ruler, and the Sun is conjunct the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. I think that may have an impact on how you feel. So if you've got the Sun on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, you may feel a little bit tense this weekend. Yeah, there'll be just something you want to get done, but it's going to be difficult to get done. And I think you're going to be aware of all the things that could be holding you back, real and imaginary, or perhaps real and psychological. Then I suppose if something's holding you back psychologically, well, yes, that in a way is real, isn't it? And with Sun on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, conjunct the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, you may be wondering how to break free, because you are really aware of everything holding you back. And you have to decide on the right approach. Is the right approach to actually do something to break free, to break the walls down? Or is it perhaps a question of being patient? And I think that patience is going to be especially important on Saturday, because on Saturday you may not feel quite yourself. You'll feel perhaps more emotional than usual, and you might be aware of trapped emotions. Having a set of emotions that you feel that you can't really express, and that might make you feel really sort of angry and annoyed and just not yourself. But it is important to be patient. And if you're brooding, see what happens if you keep brooding. How do things transition? Eventually, the Moon will make a sextile to Jupiter, and that sextile to Jupiter does actually happen on Saturday. And I would have said that Moon sextile Jupiter could be a sense of relief. Suddenly, all these problems and issues that were building up start to dissipate. And then, as you move into Sunday, the Moon changes sign, and it moves into Aries, which is a fire sign. And Leo is a fire sign. So with the Moon moving from out of Pisces into Aries on Sunday, now it may be very late on Sunday or even into Monday if you're in Australia or particularly New Zealand, but certainly if you're in the Americas or Western Europe, by lunchtime on Sunday the Moon will have moved into Aries. And I think that as a result of that, you're going to feel a whole lot better. You'll feel that finally whatever's been holding you back has disappeared, or at least has lost its strength, and you can really start to be yourself. And I think you'll be helped by the fact that there is a conjunction between the Moon and Venus, which is going to allow you to be more positive, and it's also going to perhaps enable you to engage with the right kind of people. Perhaps you couldn't get in touch with certain people on Saturday, but on Sunday you finally are able to make the connections, and there will be a sense of optimism that things could be better, and that things will be better. That's how you're going to feel. And so one positive thought can lead into another positive thought, and in the end, I think that the weekend should be finishing on what I would say would be quite a positive note. Virgo. Again, for many people, we have a weekend of two parts, and you're no different. Saturday, Moon in Pisces. Sunday, Moon in Aries. Bit of a generalization, does depend on your time zone, but on Saturday you may have no choice but to interact and deal with other people. And you shouldn't reach conclusions based on single experiences, because your experience of other people could be quite mixed. Particularly at the beginning of Saturday, you might regard the people around you as being a real pain. I mean, after all, the moon is conjunct Mars and Saturn at the beginning of Saturday. So you might feel that, that hell is other people, as Jean-Paul Sartre famously said. But no, it all depends, doesn't it? And the moon, having made this conjunction to Mars and Jupiter, moves on to make a sextile to Jupiter. And that's a completely different energy, and it's a completely different experience of other people. So, yes, there are certain people who can hold you back and can restrict you and make your life miserable. But there are other people who can make you happy, who can be a force for good. And you perhaps have to distinguish between the two, or maybe just make the progression. You start with people who are holding you back, but then you move on to people who are supporting what you are trying to achieve. So don't give up on other people on Saturday. Indeed, someone who might be a problem might actually turn into a benefit. Perhaps you need to give people a chance. I mean, I'm not saying you should always give people a chance, but do consider that possibility. Then, on Sunday, the moon moves out of Pisces into Aries. That is a rather mixed message, because when the moon moves out of Pisces, that does suggest that people are less of an issue, because from a Virgo perspective, Pisces is a very people-orientated sign, especially in terms of one-to-one relationships. But moon moving into Aries creates a bit of a change. You feel more self-sufficient, but at the same time the world does feel more complicated, and the world has already started to feel a bit complicated, because the Sun is already in Aries, Venus is in Aries, the North Node is in Aries. From a Virgo perspective, Aries is quite a complicated sign. It's about the depths of your feelings, and also a recognition that human interaction is complicated. Human interaction on all sorts of levels, not just emotional levels, but also financial levels. People are complicated. It doesn't mean to say they're bad, but they are complicated, and on Sunday you're going to be very aware of that. But you are very much helped over the weekend, both Saturday and Sunday, by the fact that Mercury is conjunct the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. So Mercury is your ruler. Mercury rules Virgo. If it's conjunct the Venus-Jupiter midpoint, that means, Virgo, that you have a fundamental faith that things are going to be fine. There's just a fundamental optimism that cannot be beaten down. However difficult people are, especially on Saturday, you're able to see beyond the difficulty. And this is also reflected in the way you communicate. I know Virgos have a reputation for, focusing on details and perhaps dragging people down, dragging themselves down with an obsession with details. But I don't think this weekend, with Mercury on a Venus-Jupiter midpoint, the things you say can be helpful, and indeed they can be healing. So that's something you really need to think about. If you can make a special effort to be positive this weekend, then I think that you will really be able to reap the rewards. Libra, I should point out that from a heliocentric perspective, Venus is conjunct Saturn. And, Venus conjunct Saturn is maybe not the most cheerful configuration out there. I think that you're going to have a fundamental seriousness to you this weekend. And this seriousness is not really connected with anything personal. It's about an understanding of the collective. Because this Venus conjunct Saturn, it was a heliocentric conjunction. It's not geocentric. And the heliocentric conjunction between Venus and Saturn tells you something about the world and the world's seriousness. And the fact that maybe people are really focusing on their own interests because they know how difficult things are. And you can feel it. You're part of a collective. We're all part of a collective. So it's something going on in the collective unconscious that you are picking up on. So, Libra, if you do find yourself being very serious, finding it a little bit difficult to relate to people in your normal way, you shouldn't get too upset about it. You should just tell yourself that you're picking up on something collective, that you're part of the collective, and you might then be in a better position to understand it and respond accordingly. And from a geocentric point of view, Venus, your ruler, has just moved into Aries, which is your opposite sign. And in a way, it's a similar picture, because Venus moving into Aries makes you very receptive and very understanding of what's happening in the world and what's happening also in the minds and hearts of the people close to you. You can pick up on it all. And yes, it can be overwhelming, but you are being given a sense of the truth. I mean, I know it's difficult to talk about the truth because you can say, well, there's no such thing as the truth. It's all relative and it depends on your perspective. But I think you do have a glimpse of the truth, and I think you should respect your own sensitivity. And on Saturday in particular, it's just important that you're not overwhelmed by this sensitivity. The moon will be going through Pisces on Saturday. The moon will be making a somewhat difficult aspect to Mars and Saturn on Saturday, particularly early on Saturday, particularly if you're East, Australia, New Zealand, East Asia. But I think we're all going to be affected by it to some extent. So you do need to have an underlying seriousness, and perhaps you need to partake in the underlying seriousness and just have a sense of your own boundaries. Just because you're picking up on the seriousness of the world, or is that the sorrow of the world, doesn't mean that you have to take it personally. The world is as it is. You're part of a world. We're all part of a world. And if you bear with it, I think you will make some progress. And I think that there will be room for optimism. But that optimistic message may actually have to come from the depths of your own soul rather from the outside world. Sunday is probably a slightly different day from Saturday. I think on Sunday, I think you're going to be in a stronger position because the moon will be moving into Aries, your opposite sign. You're in a stronger position because I know that Aries is your opposite sign, so you could say that it's a sign of other people, Aries, where other people have control. But with the moon moving into Aries, I think your stronger position will come from increased understanding and an increased ability to engage with people. And you shouldn't forget that one of the main aspects this weekend, okay, it's technically exact on Saturday, but it's a feature of the whole weekend, is a sextile aspect between Venus and Pluto. Venus in Aries, sextile Pluto in Aquarius. And of course Venus is your ruling planet. And this sextile between Venus and Pluto is going to make you very powerful in a interpersonal way. But your power doesn't come through brute force or through massive displays of strength. It comes through your own subtlety and your own understanding of other people and their weaknesses. And it's something that has developed as you pick up on the vibes, as you get comfortable in a social situation, as you pick up on people's fears. You start to understand what needs to be done. And when you're ready to influence people, just go for it and see what you can do. Because I think that if you adopt the right strategies, it won't be long before people start to listen to you and maybe accept that your way of looking at things is the right way of looking at things. Scorpio, you want to be happy and you want to be self-contained. At least on Saturday, that is the picture. It may be tough, but particularly on Saturday, yes, we have a conjunction between the moon and Mars and Saturn, and Mars is your ruler. So with the moon conjunct Mars and Saturn on Saturday, there is a seriousness there, but yeah, also you want to be self-contained. You don't feel that you really need to engage other people in whatever you're doing. And I think you're likely to get your way. I think people will understand that you need some space, and that you need space to do things your own way. But I'm not talking about things that are boring. I'm talking about things that, for you, are really interesting. They're interesting things you want to get involved in, and you probably take the view that no one else is really going to be interested in them. You may be right, But perhaps, Scorpio, you should make a little bit of an effort to engage other people. Don't write them off. Don't think, oh, well, other people are useless. They're not interested in what I'm interested in. I don't have to be involved with them. Give people a chance. Okay, you don't have to give people much of a chance, but if you give people a bit of a chance on Saturday, you might be pleasantly surprised. And there is, I think, one person in particular who is surprisingly influential. I know that Scorpios like to be in control, but you don't want to be in complete control. And there does seem to be someone out there who it might be a good idea to listen to. They've got something to say, and they might change your mind on an important subject. So as you move into Sunday, the moon moves into Aries, and from a Scorpio perspective, Aries is quite a focus sign. I know that Aries is not a focus sign, all things being equal, that Aries is a sign that is about taking the initiative. But we're looking at it from a Scorpio perspective. When you get a lot of planets in Aries, this is often a time when Scorpios feel that they need to take control and focus on particular things. And I think this is what you're going to be doing, or hopefully what you'll be doing on Sunday. There are things that need to be sorted out. And if you don't sort them out now, then you might miss your chance. I mean, after all, Sunday is the end of a week. You're trying to clear the decks before the new week. At least I think Sunday is the end of a week. Some people think Sunday is the beginning of a week, but as far as I'm concerned, Sunday is the end of a week. And so clearing the decks on Sunday might be a very good thing to do. And I think that it is certainly the right thing to do. But while you're doing all of this, Scorpio, all weekend, this applies not just to Sunday, it applies to Saturday as well. Do be careful what you say, because one of the aspects this weekend is a semi-square between Mercury and Mars. Okay, it's probably more about Saturday than Sunday, but I think its influence could be about Sunday as well. Mercury semi-square square Mars. Mars is your ruler. Mercury is a planet of communication. There is a possibility that you say things which cause upset. It comes from your own frustrations, something you're annoyed about, and you just can't help yourself. You say something, and your inner agitation is pushed out and someone picks up on that agitation, and you say something that really could be very offensive. So, Scorpio, I understand that you need to express yourself, but just don't lash out with your words. Again, especially on Saturday, but I think it could happen on Sunday as well. So a bit of self-discipline might be in order. Sagittarius. I get the impression that on Saturday you're possibly going to want to keep to yourself, if possible. And it does depend, but on Saturday you will be on best form when you are far from a madding crowd, I think. If you have to engage with people on Saturday, it may not be particularly satisfactory, particularly at the beginning of the day, beginning of Saturday. Just a lot of frustrations, and if you were to have to discuss things with other people and have to spend time in someone else's company, you might just get annoyed. So in that situation, quite a lot of patience and tolerance is required, though the moon on Saturday does eventually make a sextile aspect to Jupiter, and that creates a different picture, because the moon is in Pisces, which is a sign ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter is in Taurus, and of course Taurus is the exaltation of the moon, so the moon and Jupiter are in mixed reception. And so if you can bear with it on Saturday, you may start to feel better as the day progresses, and there may be room for optimism. You may see that things really can improve. You just need a little bit of space in order to make those improvements. And still, I think that there is an insularity about that moon sextile Jupiter. Because moon sextile Jupiter is not really going to work very well in the public eye. Because when you're having to engage with people, you're just not going to be able to do the things you want to do. You're not going to be able to sort out the things that you want to sort out. But on your own, Saturday can end up being very constructive. And if you are disturbed, and I think you might be disturbed, because on Saturday, Mercury is semi-square Mars. Mercury does represent other people because Mercury rules Gemini, your opposite sign. So with Mercury semi-square Mars, there may be people who try to impose their tensions and concerns on you. And if you possibly can, try to respond with tolerance and good grace. You may not feel like it, you might feel annoyed, but that's probably the right approach. And continuing on the theme of this Mercury square Mars, given the fact that Mercury represents other people, Mercury can represent a partner, for example, so someone you have to spend time with, like it or not. That person is tense and is annoyed about something. There's something making them agitated. And it might be best if you stay out of their way. That's one approach. You could try to engage with their agitation, but on Saturday, I'm not sure if that's going to work. Everyone should be allowed to be agitated, and let people be agitated in their own way, at their own time, in their own space. The moon does move out of Pisces and it moves into Aries, and I think from a Sagittarian perspective, moon moving into Aries is good news. After all, Sagittarius is a fire sign, so when moon moves into Aries, you feel a bit of a lift. There's a bit of a spark, and straight away when the moon moves into Aries, it makes a conjunction to Venus, and you're going to feel more relaxed. You'll feel that you're more in control, and I think you can start doing the things that you want to do without having to worry too much about people getting in your way. Yes, there are going to be people to deal with on Sunday, probably more than Saturday, but I don't think they mean you any harm. I think you can give them a bit of your time, but you don't have to give them too much of your time. And also, from a relationship point of view, with the moon moving into Aries, it may actually be quite fortunate, because Aries, from a Sagittarian perspective, is the fifth house, and in astrology the fifth house is often connected with amusement, fun, romance, and that could be good for relationships if there's a light touch, if nothing is taken too seriously. And moon conjunct Venus in Moon conjunct Venus in Aries, for you Sagittarius, it can be fun, and you can have fun with other people on Sunday. So I know it depends on the situation, but give people a chance. But it's just so important to keep it light on Sunday. Relationships of all kinds should not be serious. There shouldn't be any ulterior motivations there. If someone is looking for something else, like money or status, or they want something, and that kind of relationship is probably not going to work. It's all about living for the moment and enjoying someone's company on Sunday. So hopefully the opportunity will be there for you. Capricorn, you're feeling like yesterday that you need something to happen, that you want something to happen, that you're not entirely satisfied with the status quo. And there seems to be no doubt that through the power of your spoken word, you can really get people to sit up and listen. In your conversations, you're not going to be just talking about nothing. There's going to be something very specific you want to say, and yes, through the power of your words, you can bring to bear real change. So don't underestimate yourself, and you don't have to use too many words. Just a few words are enough, and you therefore, you must not underestimate yourself and your ability to create change. It's therefore important that you're not just feeling frustrated, because no one's going to be happy if you feel frustrated and you feel you can't do anything. You have to break the deadlock, and again, you break the deadlock by saying things. You perhaps point out the truth, and you say what you want, and you perhaps even give a deadline. And I think in most cases, people will listen to you. And certainly on Saturday, your communication skills are excellent. They may not be much fun, I mean, for the person listening to you, especially at the beginning of Saturday, but you're able to make your feelings clear, and people are just going to listen, and they won't like it probably, but I think in most cases they'll do things your way. And the moon does make a sextile aspect to Jupiter on Saturday, and that provides a little bit of lightness. Once you've made your point, you can afford to be more relaxed, and you can afford to start tuning into that moon sextile Jupiter. Moon sextile Jupiter is about communicating something which is fortunate and is uplifting. It may be that you have to actually go somewhere in order to deliver a message on Saturday. So a short trip might be worth the effort. It's not that you're going to achieve incredible things, but just a short trip. You visit someone, you say what's on your mind, you spread a bit of cheer, cheer, and it is going to be uplifting, and you will make your mark. So maybe Capricorn, so Saturday starts perhaps being quite difficult, but once you progress, once you have said what you need to say, then I think that Saturday will be a much easier day, and it would actually develop into something useful. And Saturday, useful and satisfying. Moving into Sunday, Moon changes sign. Moon moves from Pisces into Aries. And I think on Sunday you're going to need a little bit of distance. I think that's going to be important for you. And I think this has been important recently because Venus a few days ago went into Aries. And I think that when Venus moved into Aries, that made you, I think, more aware of your boundaries and, feeling that you need to create some separation between yourself and the outside world. And I think that's going to continue, especially through Sunday, with the Moon moving into Aries, Moon making a conjunction to Venus. I should also point out that from a heliocentric perspective, Venus is making a conjunction to Saturn. And that heliocentric conjunction between Venus and Saturn does mean that you're going to have reservations about certain people. You're wondering, can certain people be trusted? And you may decide that you've been spending too much time with particular people, and you have to be careful how you deal with this energy of Venus conjunct Saturn heliocentrically. There is a tendency to just cut people off because you're picking up on a global tendency. This Venus conjunct Saturn is a very collective energy, and you're picking up on it, and you may just want to follow the impulse of the collective and start minimizing your contacts with some of the people around you. And that might be the right thing to do. And on Sunday, I think you really start to feel this. And it's probably better to trust your instincts than to try to compromise. If on Sunday you were to give people a bit of room, a bit of space, but you do it reluctantly, then that's bad. Because if it's reluctantly, then in the end you're going to resent it, and you're going to resent other people simply for being there. And that's not a good situation to be in. Yet on Sunday the Moon does make a conjunction to Venus, and that is really saying that it's okay to be with the people you trust. So people who you really do trust, and you want to be around them, that's fine. But if you have any doubts about anyone, then I would suggest you don't have anything to do with them, not just for your benefit, but also for their benefit. Aquarius, the main aspect this weekend, one of the main aspects is a sextile between Venus and Pluto. And Pluto, of course, is moving through the first degree or two of your sign. So with Venus sextile Pluto as being a theme for this weekend, I think that you're going to be pretty persuasive, both on Saturday and Sunday. And you don't have to make a big thing about it. You don't have to make a special effort to be persuasive, to get people to do things your way. You just have to assert your power and your vision in a persistent way. And people are going to pick up on it very quickly. They'll realize that you're serious. And I think actually they're going to want to listen to you, because it will feel as if you've got something to offer. Maybe with Pluto moving into Aquarius, you are in a way the voice of the future. That's one way of looking at it. And if you're the voice of the future, people want to know about the future. And perhaps by linking up with you, they can perhaps understand what's going on. If you're the kind of person who's got a vision, who's got an understanding of what's going to be happening over the next months and years, even decades, then you're going to be in a great position, because people are going to be interested in what you've got to say. And as a person, you represent the future, because Pluto has just moved into is moving into your sign. Okay, I know Pluto went into Aquarius in January, but it's still there, and with Venus making a sextile to Pluto, it's very prominent at the moment. And at the same time, Aquarius, your words can carry enormous weight. You can create big changes by the things you say, and you can bring to bear enormous power through your words and your thoughts. I mean, I suppose it starts with your thoughts, then you speak, and you speak with power and authority, and people listen. And so I think it can be a pretty powerful weekend for you. Now, not everyone is going to be happy with the situation. I suppose we have to remember that on Saturday there is a conjunction between the Moon and Saturn. So Saturn is very much you, because Saturn rules Aquarius, and the Moon might be representative of other people, of the emotion going swirling around you as well, the human emotion. And that Saturn can really bring it all under control. It might be a necessary thing to do, but at the same time, it might actually be resented. But it will be, I think, private resentment. I don't think it's going to be public resentment. I think you have too much control in most cases for anyone to actually want to challenge you. So I don't think you're going to be challenged. But do consider what people are thinking privately. As far as Sunday is concerned, the Moon does change sign. Moon moves into Aries, and from an Aquarian perspective, I think that that's a time when you're able to develop your message. I think that perhaps on Saturday you were sort of starting to create your message, and it might have had some rough edges. Not everyone was appreciative of it, even though they probably didn't complain about it. But on Sunday, you can develop this message and work out new ways of articulating it. It may just be something going on in your head. You're thinking, how are you going to say what you want to say? And the words go through your head, and you make some changes, and it sticks. And when people start to realize what you've got to say, especially on Sunday, I think that they will take you very seriously. And really, that's it. I think it's a weekend where you have growing power, but I think you also need to be aware of your responsibility. You know, you can have an influence on people, and that influence can be very good. But in certain cases, if you haven't thought it through, it may not be quite so good. So do consider the impact you're having, because it does matter. Pisces. On Saturday, the Moon is moving through your sign. And overall, I think that's a good thing, though you might find at the beginning of Saturday that there are a few difficulties. Those difficulties would perhaps relate to questions of control. Who is in control? And I think that you are going to want to be in control, and I think if you want to be in control, you can be in control, but in the process that might create a few difficulties. There might be some resistance, people really not wanting to do things your way. As you move through Saturday, the moon starts to make a sextile to Jupiter. And from a Piscean perspective, that moon sextile Jupiter is really good. It means that, very simply, you're going to be quite lucky with moon sextile Jupiter. Things should just work out on Saturday. They start off not working out. So to begin with on Saturday, you may feel that nothing's working, that there's disorganization, there are frustrations, and there's no point. But if you keep working away on Saturday, you'll get some kind of mini breakthrough, and suddenly things will start moving and you'll be able to put your plans into action. So perhaps if you've been planning on doing something, okay, it might be quite trivial, visiting someone, grocery shopping, whatever, suddenly you'll have the opportunity to do it and you will no longer be held back. It might seem a trivial success, wanting to go shopping and you can't. Might sound trivial, but actually it's quite a major success in its own way, because it's shown that you have actually dealt with something and you've been able to move on. And at the same time, I think that people are going to listen to you, and it's important that people listen to you, because you've got something useful to say. As the weekend progresses, there is a change because the moon moves out of Pisces. I mean, in a way, that's a bit of a shame. I mean, it was nice having the moon in Pisces, because when the moon's in Pisces, you're in control and you understand what's going on emotionally, and you're very much with it. Moon moving into Aries, which sort of is a theme on Sunday, you start having to think about other things, and the moon makes a conjunction to Venus in Aries, and this may have financial connotations. I've already been talking about money and Pisces because of stuff going into Aries. Sun's in Aries, Venus is in Aries, Mercury is in Aries. From a Pisces perspective, the sign Aries is very much about money. So with the moon moving into Pisces, it's just more of the same. And you might be even more aware about how your finances impacts your life and how it impacts your happiness. I know that's obvious, but on Sunday it may be very clear. And Aries is a cardinal sign. It's about action. And so perhaps with Moon moving into Aries and it's a Sunday, you may feel that something needs to be done with money. And I'm not talking about spending money. I'm talking about having a realization about money and being able to act on that realization. And that action is firstly about telling yourself something and then moving on and telling the world about it. And once the world understands, then it will feed back into you, and you can start to create some structure there. So don't ignore money this weekend, especially on Sunday. Finally, I should say something about relationships. From a Pisces perspective, Mercury is your opposite sign and ruler of... Sorry, let me say that again. From a Pisces perspective, Virgo is your opposite sign. The ruler of Virgo is Mercury, and Mercury is currently conjunct the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. what that means is that other people can be a real bonus in your life, especially the people you know and trust, the people that are already close to you. Because Venus-Jupiter is an incredibly positive combination. Venus is the lesser benefic, Jupiter is the greater benefic. Mercury on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint means luck coming from another person who is very optimistic, a person who is kind and wishes you well. So Pisces, really consider the people close to you, in particular partners, spouses, and so on, because I do think that they've got a lot to offer, and you've got to give them a chance to make your life better, because I think it can make your life better. And it may just be the things they say. Maybe you need to be told things which will make the world just seem a whole lot better. So do make space for other people, particularly if you care about them, because I think there's a lot of benefit there with Mercury conjunct the Venus-Jupiter midpoint. That is the astrology for the weekend, and I now want to look at the weekend from the perspective of the I Ching. And so I asked the question, what is this weekend going to be like? For those watching the I Ching segment of this video, a reminder, if you do not watch the next segment, this forecast does not apply to you. It's only for people that watch this segment. So here is the I Ching segment of the video. So if you watch this segment, then it applies to you. So what is this weekend going to be like? And I got a single hexagram. Doesn't move. And that single hexagram is hexagram 10, which is treading. And treading gives us the symbol of a tiger. And a tiger is just lying there. So you imagine you leave your bedroom or whatever, and you open a door and you go out into the corridor, and there just happens to be a tiger just lying there. That's how I see it. It seems to be sleeping, and clearly you have to be very careful if there's a tiger sleeping in the corridor. And what you don't want to do is tread on its tail. I mean, that would be bad, because then it might bite you. And being bitten by a tiger is certainly something you want to avoid. And it indicates at this weekend that there is a difficult situation that requires a certain amount of caution, but at the same time there is a certain margin of error here. The indication being that perhaps we actually can get away with treading on the tiger's tail. Maybe the tiger will forgive us and it won't bite us. Or even if it does bite us, the bite won't be too bad. And so what is that situation that is difficult? It requires caution, but at the same time, we can't be too cautious because we have to engage with it. Now, because treading doesn't move, we can say that it's locked. So it's not that there's a result here. We're just in a situation this weekend where, we're treading carefully, and we know it's dangerous, but we have to perhaps tiptoe. I don't think we're going to always tiptoe. I think in the first instance we're going to be quite impulsive. We're going to rush forward. The tiger is going to growl. It might even bite us a bit, believe it or not, but not bite us too badly. And in the end, we can start to get to grips with the situation, but it is locked. So it's not really going anywhere. And there is a nuclear hexagram here. Because it's locked, I think it's often important to look at the nuclear hexagram. This is the hexagram in the middle. So we take the fifth, fourth, and third lines, and we put those on top of the fourth, second, and first lines, and we do get a nuclear hexagram. And that nuclear hexagram is hexagram 37, the family. Now, given the fact that it is the weekend, and I suppose over the weekend people often spend a lot of time with their family, this may indicate that the underlying issue that the tiger represents is something about family dynamics. Perhaps the family situation is a little bit complicated this weekend, and that's what underlies the tiger. The tiger represents a family issue, perhaps, that needs to be treated with caution. There is scope for getting bitten. There's scope for being bitten seriously. But we need to kind of tread around the problem. And if we show the right balance between decisiveness and caution, then it should be okay. Though I should say the family doesn't necessarily mean just the family. The family can represent the clan, our grouping. So it may be about a group of friends. If we're a gang member, for example, I don't think there are many gang members watching this video, but if any gang members are watching this video, you have to be very careful with your gang. You have to tread carefully. There's a tiger in the corridor, remember. So depends on the situation, but looking at the nuclear hexagram, I think the tiger represents some group that we're involved in, and given it's a weekend, I would guess that represents the family and family dynamics, and perhaps a family issue that needs to be treated with a certain amount of caution. Now I want to look at the moon conjunct Saturn. And in astrology, the moon conjunct Saturn does have a rather problematic reputation. I mean, I know we're supposed to think that every aspect is great, that we just have to handle it in the right way, but all things being equal, moon conjunct Saturn is not considered to be great, because the moon is about our emotions. It's about who we are, to an extent. The moon is just as important as the sun. We should never forget that. Certainly in female horoscopes, I would have said the moon is more important than the sun. So don't forget the importance of the moon. And if it's conjunct Saturn, you get the sense of not being able to express something, hitting some kind of roadblock. But in a positive way, Saturn is about structure. I think that's what we're always told in astrology classes. Saturn is about structure. So if the moon is conjunct Saturn, then moon conjunct Saturn represents the moon being structured, and the chaoticness of our feelings and our impulses can be contained, and that might be a good thing. So the way I wanted to look at this moon conjunct Saturn is, as always, to look at people who have this aspect. And I've shown some of them are on this thumbnail, like the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, has Moon conjunct Saturn. So does Diana Rigg. Diana Rigg, Bill Burroughs, and Piers Morgan, and others. And there was a Moon conjunct Saturn at the time of Hiroshima. So let's start with Bill Burroughs. So Bill Burroughs was a very talented American writer. If you haven't come across him, he wrote Naked Lunch, and he wrote Junkie. I think those are the two books of his that I've read, Junkie and Naked Lunch. And he had a fairly dramatic life. He killed one of his wives, I think. He put a... I think she put a glass on her head, and he shot it. He was trying to shoot the glass from her head, and he missed and hit her and killed her. And so he's a murderer. He got away with it, though. That was in Mexico City. I think he bribed someone. So a colourful life, but he does have Moon conjunct Saturn. So let's have a look at Bill Burroughs' chart. So here is Bill Burroughs' chart. He was born in St. Louis, Missouri. And we see Moon conjunct Saturn. Now, the Moon is in a Gogolin zone. It's in the third house, and from a Gogolin perspective, I probably need to talk about Gogolin zones in a separate video, but it's often connected with writers. The Moon is about writers. You think it might be Mercury, but when Gogolin did his research and he tried to see which planets were working, he actually found the Sun and the Mercury didn't work. It was only Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Moon. Sorry, not Mercury. He found Mercury didn't work, so he found that Moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So he only found that 5 of the 7 traditional planets work. But the Moon he connected with writing, and Bill Burroughs does have the Moon in Gemini in a Gogolin zone, close to the IC. So that might be part of his writing ability. But he has the Moon conjunct Saturn. Now, here is what Bill Burroughs said about his own early life. Well, this is from Wikipedia. And so Wikipedia, talking about Bill Burroughs, says, his father ran an antique and gift shop, Cobblestone Gardens in St. Louis, and later in Palm Beach, Florida, when they relocated. Burroughs would later write of growing up in a family where displays of affection were considered embarrassing. Displays of affection were considered embarrassing. Those are Burroughs' own words. And so that might be Moon conjunct Saturn on the IC. In fact, I would have said that Burroughs has completely described Moon conjunct Saturn on the IC. In a way, there's nothing more to say about it. Moon conjunct Saturn on the IC. That's the family. Moon conjunct Saturn in Gemini. There is the sense of embarrassment. Gemini likes to sort of intellectualize things. Embarrassing. I mean, I'm a Gemini. I understand that. I am very aware of how excessive emotion can be embarrassing. That's my Gemini perspective. I find my Venus in Cancer embarrassing. That's me as a Gemini. But so that works. And then we need to consider his Saturn. He's got Saturn in Gemini, and his Mercury is in Aquarius. So Saturn is in mutual reception to Mercury. So Saturn is in Gemini, which is a sign of Mercury. Mercury is in Aquarius, which is the sign ruled by Mercury is in Aquarius, which is a sign ruled by Saturn. So Mercury in mutual reception represents someone who has writing ability. Now, although Burroughs had a chaotic life, drinking a lot, drug use, and everything else. Of course, he wrote Junkie. Although he had a chaotic life, he had the time to write. Okay, he had the advantage that he came from a fairly wealthy family, and he was, I think, given an allowance when he left Harvard of, I think, $200 a month, which apparently at the time was a lot of money, allowed him to not need a job. And he still needed, though, to have the discipline to write. And I would have said having Moon conjunct Saturn would surely give that discipline. So I think with Burroughs' chart, we can see Moon conjunct Saturn in terms of its advantages and its disadvantages. He talks about displays of emotion being embarrassing. His family life, Moon conjunct Saturn on the IC. So that's not great. On the other hand, that the Moon is in a Gogolin zone about writing. It's conjunct Saturn. It's discipline. So the Moon is all of those feelings that one has, and Saturn is able to contain them, bring them together in such a way that they can actually be written about. And that is a further help by the fact that Mercury is in mutual reception to Saturn. So overall, I think Bill Burroughs' chart illustrates Moon-Saturn conjunction very well. I want to look at another chart, which is, I think, showing the Moon-Saturn conjunction in a favourable light, and that is the actress Diana Rigg. I've looked at her chart several times, but she has a conjunction between Moon and Saturn in Aries, and I don't know a great deal about her, but I've seen some interviews on TV with her, and she seems to be someone who is very sharp. She doesn't mince her words, and that might be another way in which the conjunction between Moon and Saturn is working. The Moon is a planet connected with communication, and conjunct Saturn, I would have said it can be quite harsh. And certainly from what I can see on TV, she seemed to be quite capable of being harsh. At the same time, with Moon conjunct Saturn, you have a sense of structure. So I'm guessing that in order to be a successful actor, you have to be very disciplined. You have to work hard. Of course, she had a classical training, and a lot of control is important. And so you could say that Moon conjunct Saturn in Aries would represent that control. The fact that it's in the 12th house, I don't know. Maybe in order to act, it helps that the Moon conjunct Saturn is in the 12th house. I mean, if Moon conjunct Saturn is in the 10th house, you're too into yourself and you're too into expressing who you are. And so how can you possibly act in that kind of situation because you're too much of a prima donna? But with the Moon conjunct Saturn in the 12th house, maybe there's a sense in which you can pull your personality back and be the role. But from what I can see with Diana Rigg, the Moon conjunct Saturn would seem to work quite well, but it does remind us of the structure that is there. You know, Moon in Aries. If she had Moon in Aries, not conjunct Saturn, I suspect she would not have been a successful actress, because the Saturn must in some way have been able to restrain the impulses of that Moon in Aries. I mean, that Moon in Aries might have been too forthright, too aggressive, but Saturn was able to provide a little bit of control that allowed her to function professionally. Another person who's got Moon conjunct Saturn, who doesn't mince their words, is Piers Morgan. Now, for Piers Morgan, I do not have a time of birth. So I've no idea where precisely his moon is. At noon, for where he was born, the moon was at 9 Pisces and his Saturn was at 11 Pisces. So his moon could have been anywhere between 3 Pisces and, 17 Pisces. So that's quite a way, that's quite a margin. But still, he has Moon and Moon and Saturn in the same sign. And the impression one gets of his Moon conjunct Saturn is like Diana Rigg. It seems to indicate the sharpness of the conjunction. The Moon is about the way we communicate. It's about the way we communicate impulsively, how we communicate our emotions. So with Moon conjunct Saturn, that can be certainly sharp and abrasive. And I think that's how we should perhaps be understanding it. And of course, we have to look at what else is going on in his chart, because we cannot look at the chart in isolation. And his moon is not just conjunct Saturn; it is opposition Mars, and it's opposition Uranus. So Piers Morgan was born with a Mars-Uranus-Pluto conjunction, which his Moon-Saturn conjunction is opposite. So that is going to make him more forthright and more aggressive than if he just had the Moon conjunct Saturn. He's got Moon conjunct Saturn opposition Mars. So that does add to it. But Saturn is also about discipline. I mean, as a journalist, he was obviously really successful. I think he wrote books when he was a young journalist. I think he wrote books about celebrities. He didn't waste time going to university. He just got a job in journalism. And I think one could just see Moon conjunct Saturn as perhaps just a capacity for hard work. That's another way we can see Moon conjunct Saturn. I'm not able to really say anything particularly negative about his Moon conjunct Saturn. Obviously, a lot of people don't like him, but that's part of who he is. He's not the kind of person that everyone is ever going to like. So I don't see anything especially negative about that Moon conjunct Saturn, but I don't really know much about anything about his private life. So maybe if you knew him really well, you'd get a better idea about how that Moon conjunct Saturn was working, or what his family situation was like, what his childhood was like. I've no idea. But I think this is another chart where the Moon-Saturn conjunction does appear to be working well. Looking at someone else. So yesterday I talked about Humza Yousaf, who was the First Minister of Scotland. He's still in his job, though. That's his heliocentric chart. I don't really want to look at his heliocentric chart, so I will go back to his geocentric chart. Okay, there's Humza Yousaf's chart. You can see he's got a fairly wide conjunction between the Moon and Saturn, but it's in Scorpio. It's around 5 degrees. Moon is applying to a conjunction of Saturn when he was born. It must work for him to some extent, because whatever you think about him, he's successful. He's the First Minister of Scotland. He came from an immigrant family. He was born in Scotland, and he's reached for very heights. And he's still young. He, born in 1985. So this year he's going to be 39. So he's only 38 years old. So someone who has been really successful politically, and he has the Moon rising. Might be in Scorpio. So it's not a great place for the Moon being in Scorpio. It doesn't have any mutual receptions, but still. The Moon represents the people. Moon is a water sign. And I suppose as he has climbed the greasy pole, he has been aware of which people he needs to get on with. Perhaps very good at making connections and understanding perhaps what is going on, not necessarily in the whole of his country, but amongst the sector of his country, or even his party, the Scottish Nationalist Party, the sector that matters. And the Moon is making a conjunction to Saturn. So that is certainly a bit grim. And that does suggest that there may have been issues in his family life. I believe he's been, I think he's been divorced once, and I think, but a lot of people are divorced, so it's not, that in itself is not a big deal, but that might suggest that he's not entirely fortunate in terms of his domestic and family life. There may be sort of ups and downs, but Moon conjunct Saturn can be about just simple discipline. It is a very disciplined conjunction, and in his case, it has enabled him to be successful. And it's in Scorpio because it just keeps going. It's stubborn, and it's certainly structured. So again, Saturn is about structure. And one thing about this Saturn that Saturn is on the ascendant. If you've got Saturn rising, Saturn can be about being chief of your community. That's a traditional way of looking at Saturn rising. And so Moon conjunct Saturn, he's able to be in control. But of course, the story hasn't fully played itself out. We don't know what's going to happen during the rest of his career. It seems to me, when I looked at his chart yesterday, that 2026 was probably the end of it. When he in his Indian astrology, he changes dasha. You've also got Scottish elections, I believe, in May 2026. But for the moment, he's okay. But we should not forget that with his Moon conjunct Saturn, Uranus is going to be rolling over it very soon. Moon at 22, when's that going to happen? Uranus will start hitting that conjunction end of April. In fact, Uranus is already crossing his ascendant. So Uranus is, on his descendant. So Uranus in Taurus is going to be opposition his ascendant, it's going to be opposition his moon, it's going to be opposition his Saturn. So if there is any malefic potential to Humza Yousaf's Moon conjunct Saturn in Scorpio, we're about to see it, I think, very soon. Now let's look at a couple of people who've got Moon conjunct Saturn who it really hasn't worked for. Oh, I've forgotten. One other person. Can't forget Meghan. Meghan's important. We've always got to talk about Meghan. We don't want to ignore Meghan. Meghan has got Moon conjunct Saturn. And I don't want to say much about it, but I would have said in many cases, in many ways, Meghan's Moon-Saturn conjunction is a benefit. Her Saturn, she's got Saturn in Libra, which is it's exalted, and like Diana Rigg, she's an actress. Obviously, she's not quite in the same league as Diana Rigg, but you've got the sense of control, complete control. I think that Meghan has tried to be in control throughout. That must have helped her. And discipline and hard work. I don't think one can doubt her hard work, especially in the run-up to meeting Harry. She was really trying hard. She knew what she wanted. She knew what she wanted. There was a high level of planning. That comes from that Moon conjunct Saturn, I believe. It creates structure. If you look at her on TV and videos, it just seems everything is controlled, everything is thought about. The way she dresses, the way she appears, she wants to be in a, she tries to coordinate with photographers so that she's caught in the right way, and that level of control, and of course you could say the control she has over Harry, comes from her Moon conjunct Saturn. And I might not like what I see, but it works for her. I mean, she's done really well. She's married Harry. She's wasn't a particularly successful actress, but she's now in her own way a super celebrity, even though a lot of people don't like her. But that Moon-Saturn conjunction has worked, and I think it's been helped by the fact that it's connected with Jupiter. She doesn't just have Moon conjunct Saturn, she does have Moon conjunct Jupiter. I know that Saturn's in the way, but Moon conjunct Jupiter can also be extremely fortunate. Okay, so now I want to talk about people who are maybe not experiencing Moon conjunct Saturn in quite the best way possible. John Wilkes Booth. Don't have a time of birth for John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth was the person who assassinated Abraham Lincoln, and so he has Moon conjunct Saturn. Don't have a time of birth. Difficult to know how it worked. Obviously, he was hanged for murdering Abraham Lincoln. The Moon conjunct Saturn is, well, we don't really know where his moon is. He might have had the moon in Scorpio, might be in Sagittarius. So all things being equal, probably the moon was in a different sign from Saturn. I think when you've got the moon and Saturn in a different sign, it certainly weakens the conjunction. And this conjunction is about 6 degrees apart. Still, this is an example of someone who had Moon conjunct Saturn, who made mistakes, who got annoyed about things, took things too seriously, and ended up killing the American president and being hanged. Another person with Moon conjunct Saturn was the Russian helicopter pilot Maxim Kuzminov. And so there's his Moon-Saturn conjunction in Pisces. So he was flying helicopters for the Russian military, and he defected to the Ukraine, and he got a big prize. I don't know, something like, was it $500,000 or euros? Then he went to Spain, and then I think a couple of months ago he was killed. He was shot numerous occasions. He was shot about 6 times and run over with a car, and that was the end of him. And so he had Moon conjunct Saturn. Now, in his case, I would have said Moon conjunct Saturn might be about discontent, not being comfortable with his position in the Russian army, thinking the grass is greener, and making mistakes. I think certainly in terms of his own life, defecting to Ukraine was a mistake. But I don't have a time of birth for it, so it's difficult to have a context. So it's like with John Wilkes Booth and Maxim Kuzminov. Yes, they've got Moon conjunct Saturn, but I don't have a time of birth. And I think looking at the other charts of people with Moon conjunct Saturn, I think in every single case, people who have been successful and famous, we can see how Moon conjunct Saturn has actually helped them. So I think in many cases it can be very useful having Moon conjunct Saturn. It may not be a happy place, Moon conjunct Saturn. It may not be a happy configuration, but I do think that it can be constructive. Finally, I just want to look at a couple of events which have Moon conjunct Saturn. So with Moon conjunct Saturn, you are starting a project. the Germans invading Russia. Operation Barbarossa. I mean, I've taken this for Berlin, but obviously it would be somewhere a bit further east from this where the invasion actually happened. But the time I have is 3:15 a.m. June the 22nd, 1941. So that would have been a couple of hours later Russian time. So this is the start of Operation Barbarossa. The moon is separating from a conjunction of Saturn, and the moon is void of course. The moon is at 29:15 Taurus, so it's made its last aspect before leaving the sign. That's a bad position for the moon. I know it's in Taurus, a sign of its exaltation, but it is conjunct Saturn, it's conjunct Uranus, and it's now void. Yeah, it may get to a conjunction of Jupiter, but Jupiter is in its detriment. Plus, the moon has to change sign to make that conjunction. And perhaps this chart is an indication that Hitler didn't use astrology. Hitler didn't use astrology, by the way, I don't think. I don't think Hitler believed in astrology. He believed in himself, but he didn't believe in astrology. So, Operation Barbarossa, the start of a new venture, invading Russia. We know the venture didn't work very well, and the moon was conjunct Saturn. Another venture that took place with moon conjunct Saturn, this moon conjunct Saturn started the war for Russia. This was the beginning of a war for Russia. Began with moon conjunct Saturn. The thing that ended the war for Japan, or was the beginning of the end, I suppose we had Nagasaki, was Hiroshima. And this is a chart for when the bomb exploded over Hiroshima. And the moon is exactly conjunct Saturn. I mean, the moon is at 18 Cancer, and Saturn is at 1813 Cancer. They're only 13 minutes apart. So, moon conjunct Saturn. Here we see the full malefic energy of moon conjunct Saturn. People dying en masse. The question is, was this a good time to elect the chart? I mean, I'm sure astrologers didn't choose this moment, but I suppose you could say, if you are trying to choose the time of an event which is going to cause a lot of people to die, and you want it to be successful, as in a lot of people to die, maybe it's good to choose a time when you've got moon exactly conjunct Saturn. And so I think that fits well. I suppose you could say Cancer is the country, the nation, the destruction of a nation, perhaps. But I think the fact that you had a moon conjunct Saturn, exact moon conjunct Saturn at the time of Hiroshima, I believe is very significant. Another event was the assassination of Kennedy. Moon was conjunct Saturn. Now, the moon conjunct Saturn does happen quite a lot. It happens every month. But in this case, Saturn was almost exactly rising. So as he was shot, Moon was applying to the conjunction of Saturn. And I suppose that describes the event to an extent. Saturn rising, it was obviously a very serious event with Moon conjunct Saturn. Then there's the death of a couple of other deaths I've got very quickly. We've got the death of Pierre Curie, who was Marie Curie's husband, and he was killed. He was knocked over by a carriage in Paris, and I think he broke his skull or something. And so there we have the moon just separating from the conjunction of Saturn, and Saturn is close to the seventh house cusp. So maybe, that's maybe how moon conjunct Saturn might be working. And finally, there's the death of the British Queen. So here is the chart for the death of the Queen. On September the 8th, 2022, I believe it happened at 6:30 in the afternoon. Some points about this chart that I haven't already made, that I did mention that in 2020 there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which I linked with Britain perhaps being cursed, the end of Britain, and I came up with reasons for that. And that conjunction was at 0 degrees Aquarius. And you can see that the Queen died, if we got that time right, with the ascendant at 0 degrees Aquarius, and with Pluto coming onto the ascendant. So that ascendant was picking up on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and I think that's further evidence that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020 was really bad for Britain. It was something that's coming to an end. And yes, there is a conjunction between the Moon and Saturn. So the Moon and Saturn can be about the death of someone important. But now you're saying, hold on, what about all the people who die and don't have Moon-Saturn conjunctions at the time of death? Okay, J.F. Kennedy, Queen Elizabeth II, Pierre Curie. We know about that. But what about ordinary people? Well, my reply to that would be what Shakespeare said in Julius Caesar. When beggars die, then are no comets seen. The heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes. So, unfair as it might sound, when John F. Kennedy gets assassinated or Queen Elizabeth II dies, that is a big deal for the collective. When just ordinary people, when I die, it's not a particularly big deal for the collective. And so it is more likely that when someone like the Queen dies, you're going to see it in the heavens. The heavens will themselves blaze forth the death of princes and queens and presidents and other famous people. So that's it with the conjunction between Moon and Saturn. I've tried very hard to be positive, and I think I've demonstrated that in personal charts, Moon conjunct Saturn can actually be very useful. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, I would of course be grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you're not subscribed, let me start again. If you did enjoy the video, I would be grateful if you were to like it. And if you're not subscribed, yes, I would be very, very grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.